Welcome to the Joshua Ngoma podcast for spiritual inspiration and Africa's strategy positioning in global politics.
Hello. Welcome to yet another live broadcast. My apologies for starting a little late. I think we had some technological issues to run through. So we've been discussing Christianity or church and politics, or church and government, if you like, for the past few days. And we're going to continue on that theme. And today we are looking at the role of biblical roles of state and civil governments, if you like. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. And take your notepads if you have one near you, so you can take some notes and pick some things you find very helpful and important. And I'd like that feedback in the comment section, or if you watch it later, send me some feedback. I would love this to be an interaction so that it's not a monologue where I'm talking to you, but I can get that feedback, and it helps me to assess how you're finding some of this information or nuggets of truths to be personally useful in your life or in your Christian walk, if you like. So we're going to do a recap of what the separation of church and state is. Then we're going to go into the biblical roles of state and civil government as prescribed in the Bible. So what we stated earlier is that the founding of the United States, the Constitution of the United States was not founded on Christianity, like many people believe. To the contrary, the Constitution of the United States does not mention God anywhere. The Constitution of the United States does not mention religion anywhere except in exclusionary terms. So at the founding of the United States Constitution, or the founding of this republic, there were competing interests, and then the church-state calculus is as old as a republic, if you like. So what happened at the founding was that the two main prevailing viewpoints at that time were, of course, those that were Christians, and they were faith people, they were believers, and there were those that were, if you like, men of the Enlightenment. What was going on in Europe at that time was this Enlightenment. It was an age of enlightenment where they believed in some kind of deity. They were deists. They believed in some God of nature, the God that was a creator, created the heavens, but they did not believe the heavens and the earth. They believed he created the universe, but they did not believe in the God of the Bible as one that is involved in day-to-day lives of the people. They did not believe in the God of the Bible, like the revelation. They believed in the person of Jesus, that he existed, but they did not believe in his divinity. So these were the Enlightenment movement. They relied on reason and not faith. They relied on thought and not faith. But what was one distinction to make that is very, very critical is that the Enlightenment movement of those days, they were not against prayer. They were not against religious observance. They accommodated that in spite of them not being part of that belief system. Unlike the present so-called free thinkers that are intolerant of other viewpoints in terms of faith. So there was two competing worldviews in terms of faith at that particular time. So there was the Enlightenment movement that believed in reason and not faith. And there were people that believed in the God of the Bible, and they believed in, they had faith in the Lordship of Jesus Christ. Now, we seven most prominent founding leaders in the United States, only one, John Jay, was a Christian, and out of the seven, is the only one that didn't make it to be president. The other six actually became president of the United States. These were John Adams, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton. So these six were, if you like, they were Enlightenment believers. They believed in reason other than faith. They were deists. They believed in some kind of God that was the creator of the universe, but that this God was not intimately involved in the affairs of man. They did not believe in the God of Revelations and the God of the Bible, the scriptures, to be a holy book. They did not believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, but they acknowledged that he did come on earth and he was present. So these were the two competing viewpoints that existed. So right from the get-go, what was happening in Europe at that particular time was something that the United States was trying to run away from. So the Enlightenment believers did not want religion reflected in the Constitution of the United States. Then on the flip side, there were the Christians, the Puritans, or if you like, the Pilgrims. These left, they left England because they were under persecution from the British monarch. Because in 1593, English Parliament passed a law that the Church of England would become the official church of worship for England. This is when the British monarch broke away from the Catholic Church and they instituted a national church, which is today known as the Anglican Church. So in 1593, the English Parliament banned independent congregations. Everyone had to worship under the Church of England. So the Puritans, the group that was known as the Puritans, or the Pilgrims, if you like, they rebelled against the dictates of the British monarch. And they feared for persecution, they feared and they fled England. And they came to the United States, landed, I think, in November of 1620. They came on the famous Mayflower ship that landed in, I think, Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And those were the guys that became known as the Pilgrims or the Puritans. And they came with a manifest destiny doctrine here in the United States. So for the Puritans, they were afraid of the state, the newfound United States, to adopt one church or favor one church with litigation and make it a state religion, just like what had happened in England with the Church of England. So then, at the conception of the American Constitution in 1787, these two competing viewpoints, one for the Enlightenment movement, they did not want religion reflected in the Constitution of the United States because of what had happened in Europe. In Europe, there was a religious extremism that had taken place at that time, and of course reflected in what happened in England, where the British monarch sort of dictated that the Church of the land was going to be the Anglican Church after breaking away from the Catholic Church. So the Enlightenment movement, the Enlightenment side, did not want religion reflected anywhere in the constitution of the newly founded republic here in America. The Puritans, the believers on the other hand, did not want religion to be reflected in the constitution based on the fact that they did not want the government, the state, to give the nation or to adopt a national religion or adopt a single religious grouping and favor it with litigation and sort of prop it up to be a state religion or church here in the United States. So if you like, this became a win-win situation in the sense that Article 6, Section 3 of the Constitution of the United States sort of accommodated that problem from both sides. And it states, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office of public trust under the United States. So this gave non-religious people, religious people, equal citizenship before in the Constitution of the United States because there was no religious test required. So then in the United States, you can run for office and there is no religious test required. So this Article 6, Section 3 took care of that problem where religion was not reflected in the Constitution. So for the Enlightenment movement, they got what they wanted. For the Puritans, the Christian fraternity, on the other hand, they also got what they wanted because there was no preference given to any religious grouping to become a state-sponsored religion, like what had happened in England with the formation of the Church of England by the British monarch. So this was the genesis of the church-state dynamic or calculus here in the United States. And John Jay, he was the only believer. He was the only one that didn't make it to become president in the United States. But he was very, very influential and very, very involved. He had tremendous relationships with the other leaders that were Enlightenment leaders, giving an example that we've been looking at, that in the public square of politics as believers, we are not required to compromise our core values as Christians, the core values that we looked at, that we stand for all human dignity, that all humans are made in the image and likeness of Christ, that we demand and stand on God's righteousness, the right way of doing things, that we believe in the justice of God, the justice of God for all. Justice is universal. We also stand on the basis that we speak truth to power where it is required, but we also speak on behalf of those that are easily marginalized, the poor, the downtrodden, those without a voice, the least amongst us. We speak for those to power that they are not marginalized. And of course, our stand is that we bring the light of Christ in the public square of politics, and we are the salt of the salt of the earth when we come into public, when we begin to participate in public policy or in politics. So then John Jay was a very clear example of that he did not compromise his core values of the faith, but he compromised in terms of working with other people, the Enlightenment movement leaders that did not believe in Christianity. He worked well with George Washington. In fact, John Jay was one of the 3 contributors to the Federalist Papers, along with James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, which helped define American government. So you had John Jay, a Christian, and James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. These men were the Enlightenment men. They believed in reason rather than faith. They did not believe in the God of the Bible. But the three gentlemen sat down and actually wrote the Federalist Papers upon which the American government system is based today. John Jay believed that Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for rulers. So John Jay was not shy from the fact that his preference for leadership in the United States were men of faith, men of the Christian faith like himself. John Jay also believed in the exercise of God's moral law in public affairs. This is what he said: "It appears to me that the gospel not only recognizes the whole moral law and extends and perfects our knowledge of it, but also enjoins on all mankind the observance of it, being ordained by a legislator of infinite wisdom and rectitude, and in whom there is no variableness. It must be free from imperfection, and therefore never has, nor ever will require amendment or alteration. Hence, I conclude that the moral law is exactly the same now that it was before the flood." So John Jay he was involved in the founding of the United States as a Christian believer, and equivocally standing on the word of God. And he influenced the founding, worked with people of opposite viewpoints to his faith, but they worked together. They formulated the Federalist Papers here in the United States that became the foundation of American government. He never made it to be president like the other six, but his influence is actually underreported in the founding of the United States. He held very, very prominent cabinet positions and also served the United States in foreign service. So then to sort of cement this debate that was going on, or where both sides, the Christian religious people and the Enlightenment believers or free thinkers, they went further to bring what the fears would be from the Puritans or the Christians about the newly founded United States instituting a state religion like the Church of England, in case of England, where they were running away from. So the First Amendment was established in the Constitution after states were lobbying the first Congress to make sure that the United States does not institute a state religion. So the First Amendment was passed by the first Congress that read, "Congress shall make no law respecting any establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." So then the First Amendment sealed what the controversy was. It answered it fully, that the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That clearly answered what the Puritans were afraid of, the Christian section of the argument. But this was also a win-win situation, because the Enlightenment side, the Enlightenment believers, the free thinkers, did not want religion to be codified in the Constitution of the United States, like what had taken place in England. So this was a win-win situation. So then, where does the separation of church and state come from? Come from? Where does it come from? For starters, a lot of Americans believe that the phrase separation of church and state is actually in the Constitution of the United States. It's not. And it's usually mistaken for the First Amendment that we've just read here. The separation of church and state was a phrase that was coined by President Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson. He was replying, he coined it, and it was in a letter that he wrote to the Danbury Baptists of Connecticut to assure them that their fears of the state creating or establishing a religion, their fears were taken care of in the First Amendment. And he wrote to them on January 1st, 1802, to assure them, and the phrase was, the wall of separation of church and state has been erected in the First Amendment to give you an assurance that the newly found United States of America will not create a state religion like what had happened with the Church of England under the British monarch in England. So it was a letter that was written, and in that letter, he mentioned, or he coined, this phrase, a wall of separation between church and state has been taken care of in the First Amendment. So you need not fear that the newly founded Constitution will create a state religion, will create a state church, like what had happened in England. So this was in a letter to the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut, and it's not in the Constitution. That the phrase separation of church and state is not in the Constitution of the United States, and it's not the First Amendment at all. Jefferson used it to explain what the First Amendment had done for the lobbying churches, and this was specifically to the Danbury Baptist of Connecticut. Those are the ones he directed that letter to, and in it, he had coined this phrase, a wall of separation between church and state. Now, institutionally, like we've looked at it already, institutionally, the church and the state and the individual and the family, these are distinct, different institutions, and they are all created and mandated by God, but they are distinct institutions. So yes, the separation of the church and state, the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, the role was to stop the state intervening in the business of the church, but it was never meant to say that Christian values and beliefs cannot be applied in the governance of the United States or any other nation at all. That is not the intent of the First Amendment or the phrase separation of church and state. Yes, as institutions, these are two different things. Just like the individual and the family are also distinct governments that God has created. So the role of the First Amendment was to prohibit the state getting involved in church business, if you like what had happened in England. So then this became a win-win situation. The Enlightenment side of the argument, they got exactly what they wanted. They did not want religion reflected in the American Constitution. The Christian or the faith people, they also got what they had bargained for, in the sense that there was a guarantee in the First Amendment of the American Constitution that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So they got what they wanted. Their fears of a state religion, a state-sponsored religious church or religion was quashed. It was guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Constitution. So this was a win-win situation. The separation of church and state was meant for the government not to intervene in church business. These are two institutions that are different. But it did not mean that Christians were prohibited to bring their Christian values and participate in the governance of the United States or any other country for that matter. Because we've seen the example of John Jay, for instance. He was unequivocal about his belief in Jesus Christ. He was unequivocal on the basis that he believed that the moral law of the Bible was still applicable in the running of nations. And he was unequivocal by saying that he would prefer that the Christians run the United States. He was also accommodating to work with people that were on the opposite side of his belief system. The Enlightenment movement and believers, they have probably an opposite side of the worldview, to that of Christianity, like what John Jay was advocating. So the First Amendment and the separation of church and state, as it has been meant to understand, is actually a misunderstanding. It was an assurance from Thomas Jefferson writing to the Danbury Baptist churches in Connecticut that the First Amendment has given you what you advocated for. The state, the newly founded republic, the United States of America, will not establish a state religion. It will not support it with any religious organization with legal action, or it will not establish a church, a state church like the Church of England in England. So then it was a win-win situation that actually happened in the founding of the United States. So then, what are the biblical roles of state government? We stated that God's government is broken in 4 segments, if you like. It starts with the individual, and that is self-government, self-control, and then family government, then church government, and then state government. And the Bible gives what the role or the responsibilities of all these segments of government under God are. And we're going to look at a few biblical roles of state government today. The state government has a role to play, different but complementary to that of the family and the church. The state has no authority to perform the tasks meant for the church and the family and individual liberties given by God. Neither is the church called to supplant the authority and responsibility of the state and family. Now, here are some major responsibilities of the state in the Bible. This is not a conclusive list, but I'm dealing with the major ones. Number one, the state government have a biblical responsibility to collect taxes for all citizens who are eligible to pay taxes. And of course, we do understand that any good government will use these taxes, of course, to run the administrative state, but also to improve people's lives, build new roads, hospitals, and offer health facilities, education for our children, and of course, create an environment, a business environment where people will thrive and become, productive entrepreneurs. So Matthew 22, verse 16, and they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God in truth. Nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of man. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. So they brought him a denarius, and he said to them, whose image and inscription is this? They say to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. In Romans chapter 13, verse 7, it also says, render therefore to all their due. Taxes, to whom taxes are due. Customs, to whom customs. Fear, to whom fear. Honor, to whom honor. So then, the role of state government is to create an enabling environment and give incentives for its citizens to improve their lives and nations through innovation and hard work. People should not only be taught how to catch fish, but they must be given access to the fish pond. This is very important. This is when a government has to create that entrepreneurial environment for its people, give them a fair tax system, not a choking tax system where people are choked or people would rather do business under the table or in the dark corners of the economy. People create a dark economy because the tax regime is actually punitive and not one that actually helps them to enhance their business entrepreneurship and for them to easily bring their innovation into effect and freely exercise innovation, entrepreneurship, start new businesses and invent things. But if the tax system is punitive, and somehow it's like it's there to get its citizens, you are teaching people how to fish, but you're not giving them access to the fish pond. That is as equally as important as teaching people to fish. And what is the access to the fish pond? Is give them an enabling environment to do business, an enabling environment to thrive. And if there's one tool that some governments use against their people, it's to have a tax burden on them, a tax code or that is very hard to deal with. So they use it to sort of put people in control or to keep people in obedience by using a punitive tax system or a tax that is too high to the extent that it makes a lot of businesses unable to function because basically they're doing business to probably just pay the tax bill. So while there is a role that state governments have, that is a biblical role to collect taxes, like we've seen, it has to be reasonable taxes. It should not be punitive. It should not be, you cannot suffocate your people through an unsustainable tax system, that one that is too high and two that is punitive. While you have given them skills to learn how to fish, give them access to the fish pond too, so they can actually catch some fish. And of course, reasonably, they'll pay into the tax system, but they'll go ahead and improve their lives and that of their children and function normally. So yeah, so number one, it's a biblical function. It's a biblical requirement that a state government actually collects taxes. And Jesus actually, when he was tempted, he was tried and they asked him, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? He was unequivocal. He says, pay taxes to whom taxes are due. So that is the role of state government. It's a biblical role to collect. The church has a primary mandate in helping cushion and alleviate poverty by giving a hand up, not a handout, through social safety nets in conjunction with not-for-profit organizations. The gospel core is about doing good deeds to the least amongst us. Matthew 25, verses 34 to 40. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." So the church has a duty to teach people how to be productive. This is a function of the church. The church should not be preoccupied with getting to heaven only, because sometimes as a church we are too heavenly minded that we are not earthly good. God gave us the dominion here, and this is where we have to have dominion. The kind of, Jesus said, "I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly." So this abundant life was not promised for us when we get into heaven. The abundant life that Christ was talking about is here on earth. It's here on earth. So the church has to teach people how to be productive and be productive citizens, pay into the tax system. It is a God requirement, but it starts with productivity. If you have productive citizens that pay into the tax system of the country, that the nation will prosper, even as the people themselves prosper, and they live an abundant life here. So this is the dominion mandate. God gave us the dominion mandate to have dominion over the earth, over the animals, the creeping things, over the earth, dominion over the earth, but not necessarily dominion over other people. That mandate He didn't give us. And uh, we probably looked at it a little earlier too, that the Bible talks about entrepreneurship. There was a master that left 1, 5, and 10 talents to 3 individuals, and he went away for some time. You can read it up in Luke chapter 19. So the master gave 1 talent to 1 individual, another one 5, another one 10, and he left. And he says, "Do business until I come back." When the master came back after a few years, the guy that received 1 talent, he went and buried it. He didn't invest it, he buried it. The one with 5 talents and the one with 10 talents invested, and they made 100-fold return. Now look at this. The one that invested 5 talents, he got 5 more. It was a 100-fold return on his investment. The one that invested 10, he had 10 more on the 10. So that was also 100-fold return on investment. What does that tell me? It tells me that you stick to what God has given you. You shouldn't be looking at what other people or what other abilities or what other people have been called to do. Okay? Stick to, if God gave you 5 talents and you multiply those 5 to 10, you have 100-fold return. The one that God has given 10 talents, if they make 10 more, they've also have a 100% return on their investment. So both of you have actually maximized what God has given you. The one with the 5 talents, the one with the 10 talents, you've actually have had 100% return on your investment. So stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. Maximize what God has given you to do in your lane. Do not be, you can learn from other people. You can emulate other people like, I like what, for instance, Dangote has achieved in his business, and I want to learn how the man moves. I want to learn his business ethos and see if it can help my business here. So you're not trying to be exactly like Dangote. You're not Dangote. Let Dangote be Oga. Let him be Dangote. But you can emulate some things. Stick to your lane. What has God given you as a business plan? Take that. If Dangote maximizes what he's doing and makes 100% return, 100-fold return, you maximize what you're doing in your lane, what God has given you, and and you also get 100% return on your investment. Both you and Dangote have had 100% return, 100-fold return on your investment. You're both equally successful, but at different scale. So the one at 5 and the one at 10, they achieved the same result at different scales. But the one that had only 1 talent and buried it, there was no investment that came because he buried his talent. He did not take his talent and put it out there and see if production would come. Take your talent today, test it, throw it to the universe and see what happens. But burying or sitting on the talents or the vision or the calling that God has given you, if you sit on it, it will not multiply. It will just sit dead like that one, the guy that had 1 talent. And the master said, okay, since you have not gained any return on the investment that was given, and in fact, if the guy who had 1 talent actually multiplied it to 2, he also would have had 100-fold return, just like the guy with 5 or 10 talents. But the master said, I'll take the 1 talent that you never used and I'll give it to those that were productive, the one with the 5 and the 10, because they showed they could actually multiply their talent. They could multiply their investment and actually have a return on their investment. So then it is important that we become productive citizens that are actually producing out of our talents, out of our visions and callings. And we contribute to the development of our nation by contributing to the tax base. And the government should not institute a punitive tax system, got you tax system, or a tax system that is, the taxes are so high that people are just working for taxes. That is one way where the government is actually telling people to go and learn how to fish, but it's not giving its citizens access to the fish pond. So they go hand in hand. Now, the other function of state government, biblical roles of state government, is to the provision of weights and measures. In the conduct of commerce, the state should ensure that the rules are fair and apply to everyone so that all citizens get a fair reward for their goods and services. Now, the government should ensure that its citizens own genuine and honest scales and measures when they conduct their business and prevent cheating, false advertising, and pilfering. Now, that is biblical. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. So even God expects us not to be not to cheat in business out there. He's saying have honest scales and just weight system. so that people get their money's worth. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 36, you shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Okay? Deuteronomy chapter 20, 13 to 15. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure, that your loop days may be lightened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. So then it is expected that civil government will provide an environment where people are doing honest business and people are not offering, people are not getting their money's worth. That's a biblical requirement, that we have honest scales and measures. Number three, the establishment of the judicial system. An independent judicial system should be established based on the appeals court system. That is biblical. The local and magistrates courts handle lesser matters than the high and the supreme courts. And this is very prevalent in a lot of nations, but it's a biblical principle. The basis of law and its source in any given society reflects on the God of that society. So if we are saying that we want biblical values to be the basis upon our government is run, or a world view, then this court appeal system is what the Bible advocates. So then the law and its interpretation must be fair and should not be used to kill justice, in some cases for financial gain. Exodus chapter 18, verse 22. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. Now, this happened in the time of Moses in the wilderness. In fact, his father-in-law Jethro is the one that gave Moses this advice of this court system, because what used to happen is Moses became overwhelmed with people coming for him to sort of judge, adjudicate even the smallest of cases. And he got overwhelmed with the burden. And his father Jethro told him, as we've just read in Exodus here, chapter 18, verse 22, that basically he was telling him that have a court system, an appeals court system. Appoint some people that will deal with the lesser matters, okay? And let the bigger matters come to you. Or if they can't, if those that are dealing with the lesser matters, if they feel they can't handle them, they can bring them to you. So it was an appeals court system. But Jethro advised Moses to break it up so that he can only deal with the weightier issues and other people deal with the smaller cases. But even for those dealing with the smaller cases, if they feel it's something that needed Moses's attention, then they'll sort of upgrade that issue and bring it before Moses. So then God entrusts great responsibility to those who administer justice, to do it fairly and without delay. There's a very famous and important saying that says, justice delayed is justice denied. But ultimately, as believers and in the Bible, God is our final and ultimate judge of all humanity. Isaiah 33 verse 22 says, "For God is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king." National defense. The state is obligated to defend its citizens against national and international enemies. Romans 13, verse 14. Peace is desirable and ought to be the goal, okay? But our first line of defense is to be peaceful. But then there are times that nations are dealing with other nations that don't want to be peaceful. They have to be prepared to defend their people militarily from enemies, those that would want to attack from within and from without. So there is a God-given responsibility for nations or state or civil governments to protect their people, to have a defense system, a national defense system. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. And the Bible is saying, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. So the Bible is saying, don't go out there to start fights, with people and other nations. Live peaceably, but only to the extent that the reciprocity from other nations is also a posture of peace. If they come in war, be ready to defend yourselves. Okay? So each nation, therefore, must prepare itself for the possibility of armed conflict. So for this reason, the Bible symbol for the authority of the state is the sword in Romans 13, verse 4. And that of the family is the rod. When it says spare the rod and don't spoil the child, okay? And that of the church, the authority that the church has been given spiritually is that of binding and loosing. Matthew 16, verse 19, you can read on that. Proverbs 29, verse 15, spare the rod and spoil the child. So peace cannot just be defined in terms of the absence of war. And I think that's the greatest mistake that has been made, is to assume that if a nation is not at war, then it's at peace. No, there are other enemies within that are equally as debilitating as war. The outcomes can be equally as debilitating as a nation that is coming out of war is at war. And poverty is one of them. Poverty, hunger, disease, a lack of development, countries that live in despotic regimes, dictatorships that trample upon the basic human rights of people in those countries. That is an example of a country or a nation that is not basically in a physical war, but actually lives like the outcomes, they live like they've just come from 3 decades of a civil war. Okay, so peace cannot just be defined as the absence of war in a nation. Poverty can equally be as debilitating. Hunger, disease, underdevelopment, and living under despotic regimes. Those outcomes can equally be as bad as a country that is in a conflict that's coming out of a war conflict. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1 to 2. Therefore, I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be given or be made for all men, for kings, and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. Paul writing to Timothy, his protege, is that pray for kings, pray for the authority, those who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life. So peace in any given nation is not a given. There has to be conditions that actually create that peace in that given nation. And one of the conditions for us believers is to pray for kings and those in authority, that they will lead our nations in the direction of peace. They will lead our nation in wisdom, that they do not provoke strife in those countries. They will lead with wisdom, that they will not create strife and create divisions within the nation, amongst the people, so that the conditions of peace are compromised in that given nation, and they can actually lead to conflict in that nation. So we are commanded as believers to pray for those in authority, to pray for our kings or our leaders, so that we may peaceably live as a nation, which means that peace is not a given. Those that desire to live in peace, they must also create the conditions for that peace. And the Bible is advocating for us to pray for our kings and to pray for those in authority, that we may peaceably live our lives. Freedom of worship and assembly. Many erroneously believe that the state should be neutral or secular on matters of religion and morality. Nothing can be further from the truth of such a belief. The Apostle Paul, and we looked at it in the previous lives that we've had, the Apostle Paul expected the Roman government. Jerusalem was under the seizure of the Roman Empire. So the governing authority over Jerusalem in Paul's time was the Roman Empire. But the Apostle Paul expected the Roman government to protect him from those who treated him and sort of wanted him to shut down from preaching the gospel. And it was the Jews of the time. Okay, those that Jews, like we've stated before, there's no ethnicity called Jews. Jews are converts to Judaism. They are religious converts to Judaism. Even Apostle Paul himself, Apostle Paul was a Hebrew Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin. He started off with Judaism in terms of what he believed into. Then after the conversion to Christianity, and he became an apostle of our Lord Jesus Christ. He became a Christian after that conversion on the road to Damascus, when he was blinded and he fell, and Jesus directly talked to him and commissioned him to go and preach the gospel to the Gentiles. So Apostle Paul used to be a Jew and converted to Christianity. Jews are just basically converts to Judaism, just like Christians are converts to Christianity, or Muslims are converts to Islam. Okay, so there's no ethnic group called Jews. They are just converts to Judaism. So they attacked Paul. They didn't want him to preach the gospel. And in Acts chapter 25, verse 10 to 11, so Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know. So if I am an offender or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. But if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar. The Apostle Paul understood what his rights were, that civil government has to provide an environment for freedom of worship and assembly for believers. They have to provide that, regardless as to whether the ones that are in charge at that particular time believe in Christianity or not. They have to provide an environment where people have religious freedom to exercise their beliefs. They have freedom of assembly to meet and pray. Okay? They have to. Paul demanded it, and he was ready to go to the highest court in the Roman Empire at that time. He was ready to go to Rome and fight for his belief, fight for his right of the freedom of worship and freedom of assembly. The role of the state government is to provide this environment. It is to provide the fact that people have to be given their right to worship who they want to worship, their religious beliefs. So then the disobedience to state government as believers, we've made this point several times already, is that it is to the extent that our fundamental freedoms and rights are not trampled on. Okay, it's not a blind loyalty. We're not sheep being led to the slaughter. No, our obedience to any state or civil government as believers is only to the extent that our fundamental rights to worship, our fundamental rights to assemble, freedom of assembly, our fundamental rights to exercise our freedom of conscience are guaranteed. When these fundamental rights were threatened in the life of the Apostle Paul, he was ready to fight even to the highest authority in the land. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1 to 8. Therefore, I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercession, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God, one mediator between God and man, and the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all, to be testified in due time, for which I was appointed a preacher and an apostle. I am speaking the truth in Christ and not lying, a teacher of the Gentiles in faith and truth. I desire, therefore, that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath or doubt. So then, this environment is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of truth. Testifying, Paul was saying that, look, we pray for our kings, pray for those in authority, because we need an environment that is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Paul was emphasizing that if a peaceable condition exists in nations, that's the other reason you have to pray. Not just to live in peace, but to also pray that the conditions in these nations will be favorable for the preaching of the gospel, that men and women will be saved as God desires. So we're going to leave it here for today. Shoot me a text or in the comments. I want to hear what you think about this. Then I'll be available to answer and get that interaction going. So thank you for your time, and this has been a pleasure, and I hope you're learning something too. I'll announce the next time we are here, probably maybe tomorrow, but I'll confirm and announce that. But thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and have a great, great day. Until next time, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Joshua Ongoma podcast. Bye for now until next time.